Throughout U.S. history, groups have battled for justice. From the African American civil rights movement to the women's rights movement, many strong figures arose. Among these iconic leaders was Cesar Chavez, who led a fight for farm workers.
The police began to jail our people. We were not known, and no one would come to our support.
Chavez believed that to be a man, you must suffer for others, just as he did for the California farm workers. Chavez created a movement that shined a light on the farm workers and opened the nation's eyes to the horrible treatment they received. He dedicated his life to fighting for working conditions, fair pay, health insurance, and more. He battled against ruthless farm owners for a compromise that would make the workers' life better. The conflict he endured was not only for the existing workers, but for their children and workers and generations to come. Cesar Chavez, born on March 31, 1927, grew up in Yuma, Arizona. The conflicts in his life began at a very young age. His Mexican-American parents, Juana and Librado, raised him and his 4 siblings on a Dust Bowl farm. During the 1930s, his family came face to face with the Great Depression and was forced to leave their farm. His parents found jobs in California as migrant farm workers just to experience gruesome living conditions, sometimes having to live in roadside tents without electricity or running water. Chavez worked odd jobs at a young age to help support his family. He even quit school in the 7th grade to work full-time on the farms with his parents. In his teenage years, he watched his father attend protests and strikes against farm owners, but none of which succeeded. His mother taught him not to be violent, inspiring him to become a firm supporter of nonviolence principles practiced by both Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi. The first taste of being a community organizer came when he met Fred Ross, his first teacher in the field of movement making. Chavez became a part of the Community Service Organization, or CSO, hoping to learn how to organize and become an effective leader. However, Chavez came to a disagreement with the CSO. He wanted to hold meetings with the people they were organizing rather than meeting in fancy motels. So, in 1962, he broke off from CSO and went to Delano, California to begin organizing on his own. With the help of Dolores Puerta, an amazing community organizer from Stockton, California, Chavez created the National Farm Workers Association, or NFWA. The farm workers movement became more and more popular. Finally, in 1965, the Filipino-American Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee striked against Delano grape growers. The NFWA voted to support, and the following year the two groups combined and formed the United Farm Workers of America, or UFW. This was the start of a 5-year strike. The strike began in the fields with protests, but the UFW soon realized that if this was going to work, they needed something bigger. Chavez decided to march 340 miles from Delano to Sacramento, California's capital. He led 75 Filipino and Mexican workers. In Sacramento, he was greeted by 10,000 people, who were there to support him and his movement. All of the protesting was peaceful because of Chavez's strong belief of nonviolence. Regardless of the farm workers' vocal but peaceful protesting, growers responded violently to the strikes. However, Chavez was determined to keep their demonstrations nonviolent. As an act of rededication, he went on a 25-day fast in 1968. The growers were not any more sympathetic, so Chavez called a national boycott. Members of the UFW went around the U.S. to advertise the boycott. They got millions of people involved. Americans stopped buying grapes, supporters picketed supermarkets, and eventually, cities refused to accept shipments of grapes because no one would buy them. The boycott worked. It was not until July of 1970 when the growers agreed to sign the contracts produced by the workers. The UFW finally got their first major victory. Chavez had succeeded in coming to a compromise with the growers. The California Agricultural Labor Relations Act, passed in 1975, was groundbreaking because it was the first law ever passed dealing with the farm workers. Even though Chavez had succeeded in compromising with the growers, he continued to find ways to fight for the farm workers, moving on to the use of pesticides. He worked endlessly to get out the word of how pesticides were causing people to lose their lives, and children being born with birth defects and high rates of cancer. In 1988, he went on another hunger strike, this time for 36 days. He called it the Fast for Life. By then, many people supported him and his movement. Jesse Jackson, American civil rights activist, Baptist minister, and politician, made an agreement with Chavez to continue his fast for him. So, after Chavez stopped, Jackson fasted for 3 days before passing it on to other celebrities and well-known supporters. Just 4 years later, on April 23, 1992, in San Luis, Arizona, just 60 miles from where he was born, Cesar Chavez died. He died at age 66, peacefully in his sleep. At his funeral in Delano, California, the town the UFW was created in, more than 50,000 people attended. The amount of love and support Cesar Chavez had proved just how great of a labor leader and civil rights activist he was. The fight he led liberated millions of people, not only in California, but across the U.S., whether it was physically fixing working conditions or just serving as an inspiration. The Cesar Chavez Foundation was started after his death by his family and friends. Its goal was to teach people about the beliefs of Chavez and ultimately inspire them to follow in his footsteps. He even received the Medal of Freedom Award from President Clinton in 1994. His wife, Helen Chavez, accepted it on his behalf. 6 years later, California establishes a state holiday on March 31st, Chavez's birthday, commemorating the amazing life he led.
Today, people have been inspired by Chavez's movement and decided to strike back against monstrous corporations like Wall Street to provide a more just and impartial society. The definition of compromise is an agreement between two sides who have different opinions in which each side gives up something. By definition, Chavez compromised with the farm owners. The owners unwillingly gave up their money to get better wages and living conditions for the workers, and Chavez gave up his entire life for the farm worker movement.
I think Chavez gave all of us hope. I think Chavez inspired us to be better.
Cesar was extremely genuine in what he was trying to do.
The UFW had an impact not just on farm work and the labor struggle, but just the struggle in general in terms of civil rights.
He was a down-to-earth person that cared.
The effects of his struggle have been widely felt, from the bargaining table to the kitchen table.
He cared for the poor.
The week has fasted and demonstrated for the rights and livelihood of America's farm workers many times over the past 3 decades.
But I think of him as an American hero because he not only impacted the life of farm workers, but he affected the life of all Americans.